This video is intended only for mature audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Back when I was in high school, my best friend and I would basically hang out at school together. Her house wasn't even a half a mile away from the school, but we couldn't hang out there. Her dad was the warden of the local prison, and her mom was judgmental as well, and a bit hostile. It was the attitude more than anything that kept me from hanging out over at her house. She was a woman you didn't mess with. One day, we were actually hanging out there, and my friend's mother came home white as a ghost. She said her and her friends had come out of the grocery store, and halfway to the car, they stopped and noticed someone was in the back seat. Originally, she thought it was my friend, her daughter, but as she stepped closer, she saw that it was an elderly woman. Well, she started to go to the car, but her friend stopped her and said that she probably got off the bus from the assisted living center and she had better call the police and let them handle it. Well, she did, and within minutes, the police were there. The police car pulled up and she pointed to her car. The officer walked up to the window, and my friend's mother watched as the officer snatched the door open and literally yanked out the old woman and pushed her against the car and frisked her. My friend's mom was horrified until the officer snatched a wig off the person's head. It was a man. She was frantic now because if it hadn't been for her friends, she would have gotten in and offered that person a ride home. So, check your back seat, people. It was the summer of 2009. I was fresh out of a marriage that I jumped into too quickly, and here I was looking to find myself again. So I called my two oldest siblings that live in New York City and told them I was coming for a visit. Needless to say, they were elated. I only had to pay for my bus ticket there. It was rather cheap, and I had a good job at the time, so I was able to purchase it on a whim. Gleefully, I packed my suitcase full so I could barely zip it with all of my favorite summer clothes, jewelry, makeup, etc. I get to the bus station and all is well. The lady at the customer service desk hands over my ticket and I wait for my bus departure to be announced. Along the way on the bus ride, we made a few rest stops until we get to our transfer station in Philly, and this is where things get weird. Everyone transferring buses gets off and a new group gets on. I see a lot of strange-looking people, but none that stood out like this one. This guy had long, straggly brown hair, thick glasses, and a wilderness beard. He wasn't bad-smelling or homeless-looking. In fact, he looked quite well put together, and he smelled of cologne. But he just had this creepy serial killer lumberjack vibe about him. Whenever I travel, I always take the window seat. It's my thing. And lo and behold, creepy guy sits right next to me. He starts to talk to me. It's innocent enough. I'm not much of a talker by nature, so I listen. He talks about his sister's wedding, stating he had just attended it in Philly, telling me he's on his way back home to New York City. I nodded and smiled. He then said in the creepiest whisper I've ever heard in my life,
"I'm going to kiss you now."
And before I could respond or react for that matter, he planted his lips onto mine and his scruffy beard scratched my face. I yelped in horror and punched him as hard as I could in the arm. He let out a loud laugh and said that he loved me and that he knew I was the one. I've never seen this man a day in my life and didn't know him from a can of paint. It became very clear to me that this guy was mentally disturbed. Just as I stood up to cross over him and go complain to the driver, a young woman appeared from a few seats behind us on the bus, profusely apologizing, claiming he was her cousin and that he had a mental disability. She offered to trade seats with me, and I accepted. The whole time he's laughing, and his laugh got louder and more disturbing. That was the end of my interaction with them, but at the next rest stop, as I was getting off the bus to get snacks, I walked past their seats and saw them making out, whispering and laughing. Like, what the fuck? They were very strange people. I don't know if they were really cousins or not, but I was glad to make it to New York City and see my big bro at the station waiting for me. I ran into his arms, clearly shaken. He asked me what was wrong, but I never told him exactly what happened. Nevertheless, he and my sister tried to comfort me, but I wouldn't spill it. I have been a frequent flyer ever since this incident occurred. Even thinking about it gives me the heebie-jeebies. Okay, so this happened just a few days ago when I was on a road trip with my cousin. I'll be referring to him as James. For a quick reference, I'm 13, female, and James is 21. James and I were on a road trip from my grandmother's to my aunt's house. I have a great relationship with my cousin, so my parents let me go on road trips with him occasionally. It's about a 10-hour drive, and we were about 3 hours into the drive. It was about 9 p.m. at the time. I was pretty sleep-deprived, and everything was hilarious at that moment, so when I saw this red semi-truck outside my window, I just laughed my ass off. The man in the truck was heavyset, that's an understatement, and had a long, untamed beard. He had a creepy vibe, but I waved to him. He, in turn, did a groping motion to me. Finding it more hilarious than creepy, I started laughing harder and told James the story, doing the whole groping motion and all. He looked creeped out and disgusted, but there wasn't anything either of us could do. A while later, about 4.5 hours into our drive, James pulled into a rest stop. I walked into the bathroom, and when I came out, the man from the truck was just standing there. He looked to be about 6 feet tall at least. I looked out the glass door leading into the building and saw James glaring daggers at the door. I was confused and walked back to the car. What he told me when I got there really creeped me out, so much so I started crying. Then again, I had been awake for around 20 hours. Apparently, the man had stared and followed me inside to the building, mumbling shit about me. James attempted to comfort me, but quickly said he had to go to the bathroom and went inside. A few seconds later, while I was waiting in the car, the guy was at my window. He stared at me, a wide, creepy grin. He started saying I should go with him and he was going to treat me good. He offered me candy and just tried to coax me into his truck. I was busy bawling my eyes out. Then, right on cue, James walks out and yells at the guy and threatened him. The guy backed off and got into his truck. He still was just staring at me, the grin still on his face. We floored it out of there. We wanted to get far away from that guy. It was around 12 a.m. when we pulled into a motel to sleep. The rest of the night until around 8 a.m. was fine. Nothing really happened. Sadly, that didn't last long. When we left and went to a restaurant for breakfast, the same fat shit sat across from us. He grinned at me and James just looked pissed off. The guy walked by the table when he was going to the bathroom and brushed his hand on my shoulder, doing the same thing on his way back. A quick note, James is a chill dude and will let most anything slide, but because he's known me since I was a baby, he's protective over me. He's not like that even to my other siblings. He and I are just close. He stood up from his seat and walked over to the guy's table. He started yelling shit about he better stop following us and to back off me. He made no threats, but did curse a lot. I felt pretty nervous and just wanted to go. The guy stood up and smacked James and yelled about how I was leading him on. Their argument continued until the cops came and separated it. They got the story and came to the conclusion that because he was assaulted, we could press charges. James just said no, and we continued the day. The rest of the trip was pretty bland. The guy wasn't seen for the rest of it. However, James did follow me like a bodyguard whenever we went anywhere. Even though he was protecting me, I was terrified. He looks scary as shit, but he's just a cinnamon roll. For context, I am a 16-year-old female and live in the big capital of a country that is recovering from a violent history and which is still very dangerous. I am mixed, and since I moved here, have been called exotic more than I'd like to say. This is important to the story. Note, please excuse my English, as it isn't my first language. This happened about 1.5 years ago when me and my family had just moved here from my very peaceful and rural hometown. I was finishing my day at school late, around 6 p.m., and rain was pouring, so I ran to the public bus station, which was 4 blocks away from my school. When I got there, I was soaked. There were no people around, and there were no buses coming anytime soon. I then got the great idea to just make signs at the next cab so they'd take me home, something no one should ever do in this city, as it is highly recommended to call a cab service and never get in one on the streets, as it is very dangerous. They usually commit many crimes, and the criminal is almost never caught. Every cab that passed was full, until one finally stopped in front of me, and I got in. From the moment I stepped foot in that cab, I had a terrible gut feeling, and when I looked at the driver, I felt even less safe. His eyes were red, and his grin just gave me an overall bad feeling. I told him where I was going without stating my full address, and he started driving while stating that he loved colored women and that I looked exotic. This was all he said for almost the entire ride. For the next 20 minutes, he stared at me in the mirror and turned around to look at my body every 2 minutes or so. He didn't even mind getting caught. I was obviously uncomfortable, but decided to ignore it because I really just wanted to go home and take a warm shower. Now, to get to my house from the street we were on, he had to turn right, but when he stopped in front of a red light, he turned around, looked at me, and made the most terrifying smile that still haunts me to this day, before going in the complete opposite direction of my house and going much faster than was allowed. While he drove, he still had that smile on and was looking more at me than the road. I started telling him he was going the wrong way and to please slow down, but he just kept smiling and staring. For the next few kilometers, I kept on trying to stay calm and convince him to let me out, as all the doors were locked. I started panicking more and more, raising my voice to the point of screaming at him as loudly as I could, as we were entering a very bad and dangerous neighborhood my parents had warned me about. I started crying as I screamed, and he was seemingly getting stressed by me, so I kept going until he stopped the car. He then shouted at me, grabbed my wrist to make me look at him. He told me to get the fuck out and pay him an excessive amount of money, which I did because I was too scared to speak at that point. It was dark now, and I was in a really bad neighborhood, so I started walking away really fast in the direction of my house when I heard him scream at me,
"Wait, come back here!"
And at that point my mind went blank, and the only thing I remember was running as fast as I could, then being home and crying in the shower. Since then I have refused to take street cabs and always call taxis or use Uber. I still often think about what would have happened if I hadn't kept trying to stress him out, or if he had caught up to me once I got out. I had something really scary happen to me when I was around 18 years old in the early 90s. I was really into cars back then, and I liked working on my own cars even though I was a girl. I had a 1979 Z28 Camaro with T-tops, and in the summer I would go cruising around with my friends looking for something to do. One evening while driving up and down the main street in a neighboring city, I noticed a small red truck following us at a distance. I was with my friend Jenny, and I mentioned to her that I thought this truck could be following us. I pulled into the driveway of a fast food restaurant and noticed that the truck pulled into the restaurant 3 driveways back. I drove out in the other direction, and he did the same. Again, I pulled into another driveway, and the truck pulled in 3 driveways behind. I did this several times, and the truck kept following, always staying about 3 driveways back. Jenny and I decided that we should just head towards home, which was about 30 minutes away. We thought that the driver of the truck would just give up and let us go, but he did not. He just kept following. It was now getting very late, and we were beginning to worry as the truck had now been following us for about an hour. We did not want to go home and have him follow us there. I decided the best thing to do was drive to the nearest police station. I told Jenny what I planned on doing, and to my horror, she grabbed the steering wheel and pulled it, causing the car to veer sharply right. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed at her. "You're going to make us crash!" It was bad enough that I had to worry about the truck following us, but now I had to worry about my passenger freaking out and causing us to have an accident. "No, we can't go to the police," she insisted. It occurred to me right then that somehow she thought this was our fault, that somehow just by cruising around she thought that we had done something to provoke this. I reluctantly drove away from the police station. We approached a bridge and were stopped by the red light on a one-way street. The truck was directly behind a car that was next to us. The car turned right, allowing the truck to pull forward. I looked over, and to my horror, this guy had stepped out of the truck and was standing next to the passenger's side of my car with no pants on, and he was masturbating. This guy didn't have his pants down around his ankles. As a matter of fact, he had none on at all. I had the disturbing feeling that he probably didn't even have any with him the whole time he had been following us. I hit the gas pedal and ran the red light going over the bridge. Somehow my friend didn't see what the guy had been doing just outside her window. When I told her, she just kept saying, "No way, no way." "How the hell did you not see that?" I asked her in disbelief. It occurred to us that this guy would likely rape us if he had the chance. I drove up and down a few one-way streets and back over the bridge and out into the country. He followed us for what seemed like forever until we were finally able to lose him going really fast out into the middle of nowhere. We went home and tried to forget about it. For some reason, I never told my parents, and I'm not sure why. A few weeks later, I saw on the news that the police were looking for a guy in a small red truck. He was wanted for rape. They showed his picture and it resembled the guy that had followed us. I thought that their description of the truck was a little different than the one we had seen, but maybe not. I always wondered if it was him. I'm just glad that we never had to find out.